My sister mocked me for being alone at her wedding, saying, "You're the family's biggest embarrassment." My uncle said, "She always wanted to be you anyway." Then the groom looked at me and said, "You should have been the one I married." And everyone froze. It starts the day of my sister Brittany's wedding. We were in one of those over-the-top reception halls on the grounds of the Biltmore estate in Asheville, North Carolina. Think gold trim, fresh orchids, waiters in black vests serving imported wine. It was the kind of wedding that gets featured in bridal magazines and passed around on Pinterest boards. I was standing near the bar, sipping white wine, watching her swirl around in her designer gown, basking in the attention. She looked stunning, I'll give her that. She always looked stunning. Blonde, fit, radiant. The kind of woman who never had to try too hard. People just flocked to her. Meanwhile, I was tucked in the back of the room in a navy blue gown I'd chosen more out of necessity than desire. Simple, elegant, and totally forgettable. Exactly how I've felt around my family for as long as I can remember. Then she walked by my table, laughing with two of her friends, and stopped just long enough to look at me and say, "Well, at least someone's keeping the table warm for the single ladies." I smiled politely, feeling every pair of eyes flick toward me. She wasn't finished. "You know," she said a little louder, with that fake joking tone that's somehow worse than outright cruelty, "Maureen's still single, 35 and still playing with yarn in Asheville. You should see her cat collection." There were chuckles, some are uncomfortable, some gleeful. My cheeks burned, and then she turned and strutted off toward her husband, Landon. Brittany and I were never close. We weren't enemies exactly, but we were never sisters in the emotional sense. She was the golden child. Cheer captain, homecoming queen, graduated with honors from UNC Chapel Hill. I was the other one. The girl who loved books and art, who spent her teenage years sketching in notebooks and going to open mic poetry nights in coffee shops. Our parents made it clear who they favored. Brittany was praised for everything. Her fashion sense, her grades, her dating life. I was told I needed to smile more, be more sociable. You'd be so pretty if you just tried harder. So I stopped trying. I moved to Asheville after college and opened a tiny handmade textiles shop. I worked mostly with natural dyes and Appalachian weaving techniques. It wasn't lucrative, but I loved it. I had a quiet life. Hiking in the mornings, art in the afternoons. A small but loyal group of friends. And yes, 2 cats, Louie and Myrtle. I never married. A few long-term relationships fizzled out. The last one ended because he said I was too closed off. Maybe he was right. The first time I met Landon was Christmas 3 years before the wedding. Brittany had brought him home to meet the family. He was tall, lean, a bit formal, clean-shaven and polite in that corporate lawyer way. I expected him to talk about stocks and football with my dad. Instead, we ended up making coffee in the kitchen at 6 a.m. on Christmas morning, both jet-lagged and avoiding chaos. He asked what I did for work. I told him about my shop, expecting the usual polite nod and quick subject change. But instead he said, "That's incredible. Do you use natural dyes, like from plants?" I blinked. "Yeah. Mostly indigo, madder root, goldenrod." He leaned against the counter. "That's amazing. I did a short ecology course in college. We learned about traditional dyes. I remember how much work it takes. You must have so much patience." That was the first time in years someone in my family home looked at me with genuine interest. We ended up talking for 2 hours about art, hiking trails, and local history. It was comfortable, safe. After that, I noticed he'd find his way into the kitchen whenever I was in there, helping with dishes, making coffee again, asking quiet questions. I wasn't stupid. I knew he was dating my sister, but I also knew something had shifted. There was a tension, not sexual exactly, but charged. Like 2 people both holding something in their mouths they weren't allowed to say. The last night of that trip, he hugged me goodbye. He held on a second longer than necessary and whispered, "You really are something else, Maureen." Back to the wedding night. After Brittany's jab about my love life, I stayed seated, silent, nursing my wine. I'd spent my whole life being humiliated in subtle ways by my sister. I'd learned to let it roll off my back, until Uncle Howard showed up. My dad's older brother, a bit of a wild card, always said what everyone else wouldn't. He pulled up a chair next to me, looked at my untouched dessert, and muttered, "Don't let her get to you. She's always wanted to be you anyway." I looked at him, startled. I half laughed, thinking he was joking, but he just shrugged. She copied everything you ever did when you were little. You started painting, she painted. You went hiking, suddenly she's buying boots. Even brought home a damn cat once after you did. I didn't know what to say. I'd never seen myself that way. I thought she pitied me, mocked me, but envied me. Uncle Howard winked and walked off before I could ask more. Then came the toasts. I hadn't been asked to give one, obviously, but Uncle Howard had. He raised his glass and, in typical Howard fashion, started with a memory that made everyone laugh and then abruptly pivoted. "And let's not forget Maureen," he said, voice booming over the mic. "The woman who's always walked her own path. A real artist, a real soul, and Brittany's first role model whether she admits it or not." Gasps, a few murmurs. Brittany's smile became fixed. Her hand tightened around Landon's. Then Landon stood. He thanked everyone, thanks Brittany, then turned toward me. "And Maureen," he paused, eyes on me, voice a little shaky. "I've always admired your strength, your independence. The way you know who you are and don't apologize for it." People were shifting in their seats. Then he looked directly at me and said, "You should have been the one I married." You could hear the collective snap of attention in the room. Every fork froze, every face turned. I sat motionless. Brittany turned toward him like she'd been slapped. And me, I just stood up. I didn't say a word. I walked right out of the reception, down the stone steps, and out into the cool spring night. My heels clicked against the cobblestones. My breath came in sharp pulls. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just kept walking. Behind me, voices erupted. Brittany shouting. Someone called my name. The wedding unraveled right there. But I didn't look back. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the winding roads that cut through Asheville, up into the quieter outskirts near the Blue Ridge Parkway. I pulled over at a scenic overlook, parked, and sat there with the windows down, staring out over the mountains bathed in moonlight. The cool air helped me breathe again. I just sat there, replaying everything. I hadn't wanted any of it to happen like that. I didn't come to that wedding to make a statement or stir the pot. I didn't even really expect Landon to talk to me. Part of me hoped for a quiet seat in the back, a few awkward dances, and maybe to leave early before dessert. But now I was the woman who'd become the center of her sister's ruined wedding. The messages started coming in around midnight. First from my mother, "What happened? Brittany is in hysterics, we need to talk." Then a cousin I barely speak to, "Holy crap, did Landon actually say that?" I turned my phone off. The next morning, I made coffee and sat in the sun with Louie and Myrtle curled at my feet. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. The kind of exhaustion that seeps into your ribs and makes everything feel like it's vibrating, just a little off-kilter. It wasn't until Monday that I got the email from Landon. It was long, 3 paragraphs at least. He didn't apologize for what he said. Instead, he said he'd thought about it for a long time, and something snapped that night. Watching Brittany mock me, watching the way everyone laughed along, knowing how different I was from her, but in all the ways that mattered. He wrote, "You never demanded attention, you just lived." And somehow that scared everyone more than her theatrics ever did. He told me he'd always felt a connection, that it had grown during that Christmas visit, that he hadn't acted on it, but he thought about it often. Then, near the end, he wrote, "I know I chose wrong, but the world doesn't give you a second chance at the right choice. I'm not asking you to forgive me or respond. I just need you to know the truth was never a joke to me." I stared at the screen for what felt like an hour. I didn't reply, not then. Over the next few days, the family started unraveling. My mother tried to play peacekeeper, calling me every day with updates. "She's devastated. She won't talk to anyone. You could at least tell her you didn't plan it." I kept my voice calm, even. "I didn't." Dad, for once, stayed out of it, which in my family was as close to taking my side as I could expect. He called once, said, "Hope you're okay," and left it at that. Uncle Howard, bless him, sent a bouquet to my shop with a note that read, "Sometimes the truth just needs an open mic. Proud of you." Brittany, on the other hand, exploded. She started calling mutual friends, telling anyone who'd listened that I had seduced her fiancé, that I'd planned this whole thing, that I was bitter, lonely, and manipulative. Classic projection. The reality? I hadn't done anything. I never told Landon how I felt. Hell, I hadn't even let myself admit there was a feeling. That shame belonged to all of us. But it wasn't my crime. 3 weeks later, the marriage was annulled. Officially, they cited irreconcilable differences. Privately, the rumors were relentless. People said Landon had fallen in love with the wrong sister, that the bride had humiliated the maid of honor. I wasn't even in the wedding party. That someone had an affair, which wasn't true, but once gossip gets going, it doesn't care what's real. Brittany left town not long after that, moved to Miami, started over again for the third time in 5 years, and I kept living. At first, it was weird. I couldn't go to the grocery store without someone asking about it. "You're that Maureen, right?" I started ordering groceries online for a while. People in town love drama, and nothing beats a good family feud. But slowly it passed. I focused on my work, poured myself into dyeing, weaving, sourcing local wool. I launched a new line in the shop, mountain-inspired throws and scarves, that did really well. Tourists love anything that feels authentic, and irony of ironies, my simple, quiet life was now in demand. Every so often, Landon would send another message. Always respectful, never too much. Once, about a year after the wedding, he stopped by the shop while passing through Asheville. He waited until there were no customers and asked if we could grab a coffee. I said yes. We didn't talk about the wedding. We talked about our lives. His job, my art, the weather. Then, just as we were saying goodbye, he said softly, "I meant every word that night." I didn't answer right away, just nodded. Because what could I say? We were two people in the eye of a storm that had already passed. The wreckage was behind us, but the damage was permanent. He left, and I went back to work, heart a little heavier, but still intact. Weeks passed, then months. Life returned to its quiet rhythms. Mornings with coffee and myrtle curled in the crook of my knee. Long afternoons with my loom, and the scent of lavender sachets hanging from the shop's windows. But underneath it all, there was a slow, simmering shift. The thing about humiliation is, it either breaks you or forges you, and I'd been broken too many times before. This time I decided I'd let it harden me, but into something sharp, not bitter. Brittany wasn't content to let things die quietly. Even from Miami, she kept poking. She'd post pictures of luxury dinners and spa weekends with captions like, "Some of us move on with grace, smiling face with smiling eyes." Or, worse, vague quotes like, "When snakes slither into your garden, you don't let them plant flowers." People weren't stupid. Even our extended relatives started messaging me, "What really happened, Maureen? Is it true you stole her fiancé?" At first, I ignored them. But one day, while scrolling through her latest attention-seeking story, a boomerang of her clinking champagne glasses with a real estate agent in some South Beach rooftop lounge, I had a moment of clarity. She didn't want healing. She wanted an audience. So I decided to give her one. A local women's collective in Asheville reached out and asked me to lead a creative workshop, a 1-week intensive on woven narratives, healing through textiles. The irony struck me right away, a story through threads. I said yes, not just to the workshop, but to something bigger. I spent 6 weeks preparing, designing a piece I didn't tell anyone about. I worked day and night, sketching and dyeing and weaving until my hands ached. It was a tapestry, about 5 feet long and 3 feet wide, and it was every ounce of my story. From afar, it looked like a forest, dark trees woven in natural grays and blues, shot through with lightning threaded sky. But if you looked closely, you saw two figures. A young girl standing beside another who glowed brighter, yet whose shadow twisted away, curling around the first like a serpent. In the girl's hand was a spool of red thread, leading forward, away from the other figure, toward a rising sun stitched in soft golds and oranges. The piece was titled The Quiet One. I unveiled it on the last day of the workshop. The gallery was packed. Strangers wandered in, touched by the story even if they didn't know it was mine. I watched from the back, quiet, unnoticed, until a local arts magazine editor asked to interview me. The next month, The Quiet One was on the cover of Mountain Women Monthly. My story was featured in a full-length spread, not just the tapestry, but my journey, my shop, my work, my independence. No mention of Brittany, just me. That was the first hit. Then, a few weeks later, a woman walked into my store, a slender, elegant woman in her late 50s with an unmistakably expensive bag and a thick planner in hand. She introduced herself as Rachel Jennings, a lifestyle consultant who curated boutique artisan collections for boutique hotels. "I saw your work in the magazine," she said, flipping through my portfolio. "I think you're exactly what our newest project in Charleston needs." By the end of the month, I had a contract with a boutique hotel chain that ordered 200 handmade pieces. My shop expanded. I hired 2 local apprentices. My name started to circulate in design blogs and slow-living podcasts. My mom even sent me a message one night, just a photo of the article and one word, proud. Brittany, meanwhile, didn't take it well. She began to post more aggressively. Snide little captions like, "Some of us don't need to weave their trauma into wall hangings," and "must be nice to be everyone's favorite after the drama." But here's where the true revenge happened, and I didn't even plan it. A prominent local wedding planner from Miami reached out through Instagram. She said she'd been following my story and wanted to commission custom thank you gifts for her clients, something unique and handcrafted. When we hopped on a Zoom call, she asked, "Would you be open to designing pieces for a luxury wedding expo in Miami this fall? I think you'd be perfect." I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. And so I found myself, 8 months after Brittany's wedding imploded, flying to Miami as a featured guest artist at a luxury wedding showcase. I wore a deep green linen dress I made myself, minimal makeup, my hair in soft waves. I wasn't flashy, but I looked like me. I didn't expect Brittany to be there, but of course she was. She walked in wearing a designer pantsuit and a forced smile that dropped the moment she saw me at the front table, standing beneath a banner that read, "Maureen Ellison, textile artist, featured in Mountain Women Monthly, Artisan Living, and the Charleston Indigo Collective." Our eyes met. She froze. I smiled politely. "Hi, Brittany." She blinked, then forced a laugh. "Wow, you actually made it here." I tilted my head. "Seems like I belong in the wedding industry after all." She muttered something and walked off, face red, trying to pretend it didn't matter. But the thing is, it did. She couldn't stand that I hadn't fought back, hadn't played dirty, and hadn't needed to stoop. I just kept rising. And Shed built her world on smoke and mirrors. It didn't take much for it all to blow away. The best part. After the expo, a well-known event designer approached me for a collaboration. We worked together on a healing through handmade exhibit for a wellness retreat in Vermont. Everywhere Brittany had tried to dominate, I'd stepped into with quiet steadiness and won. No screaming, no revenge plots, no sabotage, just the truth. That's the best revenge, honestly. Not proving someone wrong, but letting your life speak louder than their lies ever could.